The moment rose, Preston realized her stepbrother had abandoned her in the thick pine forest of the Wyoming territory. The September sun was already sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. She stood beside the narrow trail they had been following, her cotton dress stained with dust and sweat, watching the back of Marcus's horse disappear around a bend without so much as a backward glance, and understood with absolute clarity that he had finally made good on his threat to be rid of her once and for all. Her hands trembled as she reached up to adjust the bonnet that hung askew on her dark auburn hair, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she could hear the rush of blood in her ears. The woods around her seemed to close in, the tall ponderosa pines casting long shadows that stretched across the forest floor like grasping fingers. She had been walking for hours alongside Marcus's horse, her feet aching in boots that had never been meant for such a journey, believing his lie that they were taking a shortcut to visit their aunt in Lusk. Now she stood alone with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a small canteen of water he had tossed at her feet before riding away. Rose was 20 years old and had been living with Marcus and his father for the past 3 years, ever since her mother had died of consumption in the winter of 1870. Her stepfather had passed just 6 months ago, leaving everything to his biological son, and nothing to the stepdaughter he had barely tolerated. Marcus had made it clear from the moment the will was read that he wanted her gone, but she had nowhere to go, no money of her own, no family who would take her in. She had hoped to find work in Cheyenne, to make her own way, but Marcus had other plans. He wanted her simply erased from his life, and leaving her to die in the wilderness was apparently his chosen method. The first wave of panic hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her vision swim. She pressed her back against the rough bark of a pine tree, forcing herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Panic would kill her faster than anything else out here. She had to keep her wits about her, had to figure out which direction would lead her to safety. The problem was that she had no idea where she was, no sense of how far they had traveled from the main road, or even which direction that road might be. As darkness began to fall in earnest, Rose started walking, choosing a direction that felt right even though she knew she was likely just moving deeper into the wilderness. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun disappeared, and she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her thin dress. She had no coat, no blanket, nothing to protect her from the cold mountain night that was settling over the forest like a shroud. Every sound made her jump, every snap of a twig or rustle in the underbrush sending her imagination racing toward thoughts of wolves and bears and mountain lions. She walked until her feet were bleeding inside her boots, until exhaustion made her stumble and nearly fall with every other step. Finally, she could go no further. She found a small clearing where the moonlight filtered through the canopy overhead, and she sank down at the base of a large tree, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her skirts around her legs for whatever warmth they might provide. She told herself she would rest for just a few minutes, just long enough to catch her breath, and then she would keep moving. But the moment she closed her eyes, sleep claimed her despite the cold and fear, dragging her down into a darkness that was almost merciful. She woke to the sound of a horse nickering nearby and the sensation of warmth on her face. The sun had risen, though she had no idea what time it might be, and her entire body ached with a deep, bone-level pain that made her groan as she tried to move. Her throat was parched, her lips cracked and dry, and when she reached for the canteen, she discovered it had fallen from her lap during the night and spilled most of its contents into the dirt. The horse nickered again, closer this time, and Rose's eyes flew open wide as she scrambled to her feet, ignoring the screaming protest of her muscles. Through the trees she could see the shape of a large bay horse, and mounted on it was a man. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, but she had nowhere to go and no strength left to flee. She stood frozen, her back pressed against the tree as the rider guided his horse into the clearing. He was tall. She could tell that even with him sitting in the saddle, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build. He wore a black hat pulled low over his eyes, a dark vest over a light shirt, and worn leather chaps over his trousers. A gun belt sat low on his hips, and there was a rope coiled at his saddle. He reined in his horse about 10 feet from where she stood and pushed his hat back, revealing a face that was sun-weathered and handsome, with strong features and eyes the color of slate. "You lost, miss." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding over stone, but there was no threat in it, only concern. Rose tried to speak, but her throat was too dry and all that came out was a harsh croak. She nodded instead, her hands gripping the bark behind her as if the tree might somehow protect her. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and walked toward her slowly, holding it out. "Here, drink this. Slow though, not too fast." She wanted to be cautious, wanted to question who he was and what he wanted, but the need for water overrode everything else. She reached out with shaking hands and took the canteen, bringing it to her lips and drinking deeply. The water was cool and sweet, the best thing she had ever tasted, and she had to force herself to follow his instruction and not gulp it down too quickly. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler. "That's it, just a little at a time." When she finally lowered the canteen, she found him watching her with those gray eyes, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still hoarse but functional. "What are you doing out here alone?" He looked around the clearing as if expecting to see other people nearby. "Where's your party?" The question brought everything rushing back, the betrayal and fear and hopelessness of her situation, and to her horror she felt tears beginning to well up in her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, determined not to break down in front of this stranger. "I was left here yesterday. My stepbrother, he brought me out here and then rode away." Something dark flashed across the man's face, an anger that made his jaw tighten and his eyes go hard. "He left you here on purpose, in the middle of nowhere with no supplies," she nodded, unable to trust her voice. He swore under his breath, a creative string of profanity that would have made her mother faint, and then he seemed to catch himself. "Pardon my language, miss. That's just about the lowest thing I've heard of a man doing." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her disheveled appearance, her torn dress, her bleeding feet that she was trying to hide beneath her skirts. "You're hurt. Can you walk?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I walked for hours last night before I stopped. Let me see." He knelt down in front of her, and she flinched back instinctively. He held up his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you, miss. I just need to see how bad your feet are, see if you can ride or if I need to make a travois." Slowly, reluctantly, she lifted her skirt just enough to reveal her boots. Even from where he knelt he could see the blood staining the leather, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "Those need to come off so I can bandage them, but we should wait until we get somewhere safer. Can you mount a horse?" "I think so. It's been a while, but I used to ride." "Good." He stood and walked back to his horse, returning with a blanket that he draped around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and blissful, and she clutched it around herself gratefully. "My name's Austin Yates. I've got a ranch about 10 miles north of here. I was out checking on some stray cattle when I saw your tracks. Figured someone was lost. Rose Preston," she said quietly. "And I'm very grateful you found me, Mr. Yates. Austin's fine." He gestured toward his horse. "Come on. Let's get you mounted up and get you somewhere warm and safe." Getting on the horse was agony with her damaged feet, but Austin helped her up with surprising gentleness, his hands steadying her as she swung her leg over the saddle. He mounted behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins, and she found herself cradled against his chest as he urged the horse forward. She should have been uncomfortable with such intimacy with a stranger, but she was too exhausted and hurt to care, and there was something solid and reassuring about his presence. They rode in silence for a while, the horse picking its way through the forest with sure-footed ease. Rose tried to stay alert, tried to pay attention to their route, but the combination of warmth from the blanket and Austin's body heat and the rocking motion of the horse made her drowsy. She found her head drooping against his chest, and she jerked it back up, embarrassed. "It's all right," Austin said, his voice rumbling in his chest near her ear. "You can rest. I've got you. I shouldn't fall asleep. It's improper. Propriety doesn't mean much when you've been left to die in the woods. Rest, Rose. You're safe." The way he said her name, gentle and certain, made something in her chest loosen, and she let herself relax against him. Within minutes she had drifted off, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the security of Austin's arms around her. She woke when the horse stopped, blinking in confusion at her surroundings. They were in a clearing with a modest but well-built ranch house, a barn, and several outbuildings. The house was made of logs, with a wide porch across the front and real glass windows that glinted in the afternoon sun. It was nothing fancy, but it looked solid and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. "We're here," Austin said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. He dismounted first and then reached up to help her down, catching her when her legs nearly buckled beneath her. "Easy. I've got you." He didn't put her down. Instead, he lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the house. She should have protested, should have insisted she could walk, but the truth was she couldn't, and they both knew it. The inside of the house was surprisingly clean and neat for a bachelor's home. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a couple of comfortable-looking armchairs, and shelves lined with books. He carried her to one of the armchairs and set her down carefully, then knelt in front of her to examine her boots. "This is going to hurt," he warned as he began to unlace the first boot. "I'll try to be gentle." He was true to his word, but there was no way to remove the boots without pain. Rose bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood as he finally pulled the second boot free. Her stockings were soaked with blood and stuck to her skin, and Austin's face was grim as he carefully peeled them away, revealing the blistered, torn flesh beneath. "Jesus," he muttered, "you walked on these for hours." "I didn't have much choice." "No, I suppose you didn't." He stood and disappeared into what she assumed was a bedroom, returning with a clean shirt that he began tearing into strips. "I need to clean these and bandage them. It's going to hurt worse than the boots coming off, but if we don't clean them, they'll get infected." He brought a basin of water and some soap, and he was right about the pain. Rose gripped the arms of the chair so hard her knuckles went white, tears streaming down her face as he carefully washed away the blood and dirt. He worked with practiced efficiency, his touch as gentle as possible given what he was doing, and when he finally wrapped her feet in the clean cloth strips, she sagged back in the chair, exhausted by the ordeal. "You did good," Austin said, standing and disposing of the bloody water. "That took grit." "I don't feel very brave," Rose admitted, wiping at her wet cheeks with the back of her hand. "Being brave doesn't mean you don't feel pain or fear. It means you push through anyway." He studied her for a moment. "When's the last time you ate?" She had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think. Before we left." His jaw tightened again, that flash of anger returning to his eyes. "I'll make you something. Not much of a cook, but I can manage eggs and bacon and bread." While he worked at the stove, Rose looked around the room more carefully. The books on the shelves were an eclectic mix of classics and practical volumes, everything from Shakespeare to veterinary guides. There were no photographs or personal touches, nothing that spoke of family or a woman's presence. The house felt lived in but solitary, the home of a man who had made his life alone. "You live here by yourself?" she asked. "Mostly. I've got 2 ranch hands who have a bunkhouse out back, but they are up in the high pastures right now with the main herd. Won't be back for another week." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "I know what you're thinking. You're alone in a house with a strange man and no one else around. But I give you my word, Rose, you're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you or take advantage of you." "I believe you," she said, and she was surprised to realize it was true. There was something fundamentally decent about Austin Yates, something in the way he had cared for her injuries, and the anger he had shown at her stepbrother's cruelty that told her he was a man of honor. He brought her a plate piled high with food and a cup of coffee, and she ate ravenously, not caring about manners or propriety. He sat across from her with his own plate, eating more slowly, watching her with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable with. "So tell me about this stepbrother of yours," he said when she had finished eating. "What's his name?" "Marcus. Marcus Preston, though that's actually his father's name, not his own. His real last name is Whitmore. And why did he want to be rid of you so badly that he'd leave you to die?" Rose set down her empty plate and wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. "His father married my mother 3 years ago. I think he only did it because she was beautiful and he wanted a trophy wife, and she married him because she was sick and scared and wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of. When she died, my stepfather lost interest in both of us. Then he died 6 months ago and left everything to Marcus. His son didn't want me around, didn't want to waste money feeding and housing me, so he decided the simplest solution was to make me disappear. He could have just thrown you out. He didn't have to try to kill you. If he threw me out, I might have survived. I might have found work, made a life for myself. He wanted me gone completely, wanted to make sure I could never come back and make any kind of claim on the property." She met Austin's eyes. "He told me before he rode away that no one would ever find me, that everyone would think I had just run off, and that I would die knowing he had won." Austin's hands clenched around his fork, the knuckles going white. "That man deserves to hang. Maybe, but he won't. He'll go back and tell everyone I ran away, and no one will question it because I was just a burden to him anyway. Not to me." The intensity in Austin's voice made her look up sharply. "You're not a burden, Rose. What happened to you was evil, pure and simple, and you deserve better." The kindness in his words, the righteous anger on her behalf, broke something open inside her that she had been holding carefully closed. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and this time she didn't try to stop them. She cried for everything she had lost, for her mother and the stepfather who had never loved her and the life that had been stolen from her. And Austin let her, not trying to comfort her or tell her it would be all right, just sitting quietly and letting her grieve. When the tears finally subsided, he stood and collected their plates. "You need rest. Real rest in a real bed. You can have my room. I'll sleep out here." "I can't take your bed," Rose protested. "Yes, you can and you will. You're hurt and exhausted and you need proper rest to heal." No arguments. She was too tired to argue anyway. He helped her stand, supporting her weight as she limped to the bedroom. The room was as neat and Spartan as the rest of the house, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. He pulled back the covers and helped her sit on the edge of the mattress. "I'll bring you some clean clothes, something to sleep in," he said. "They'll be too big, but they'll be better than sleeping in that dress." He returned with a soft flannel shirt that hung to her knees when she put it on. He turned his back while she changed, the gesture old-fashioned and courteous, and then helped her settle into the bed. The sheets smelled like soap and sunshine, clean and fresh, and the mattress was more comfortable than anything she had slept on in months. "Thank you, Austin," she whispered as he pulled the quilt up around her shoulders, "for everything. Nothing to thank me for. Any decent person would do the same. You'd be surprised how few decent people there are in the world." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "Get some sleep, Rose. We'll figure out what comes next when you're feeling stronger." She slept for hours, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep that her body desperately needed. When she woke, it was fully dark outside and she could see lamplight filtering under the door. She lay still for a while, listening to the sounds of Austin moving around in the main room, and tried to think about what she should do next. She couldn't stay here indefinitely, but she had nowhere else to go and no money to get there. She would have to find work, but who would hire a woman with no references and no skills beyond basic household tasks? The next morning, Austin brought her breakfast in bed, another plate of eggs and bacon along with coffee and fresh bread slathered with butter and jam. He had clearly gone to some effort, and the thoughtfulness of the gesture made her chest ache. "How are your feet feeling?" he asked, setting the tray across her lap. "Better. Still sore, but better." "That's good. They should heal up fine with rest and care." He hesitated, then pulled a chair over and sat down. "I've been thinking about your situation, about what you said yesterday about having nowhere to go." "I'll figure something out," Rose said quickly. "I don't expect you to take care of me. You've already done more than enough. Let me finish." His tone was gentle but firm. "I need help around here. The house is clean enough, but I'm no cook, and there's mending that needs doing and a garden that's being neglected. My ranch hands can handle the cattle and the horses, but they can't manage the house. I'd like to offer you a job if you're willing. Room and board plus wages. Nothing fancy, but it would give you a place to stay and some money to save up." Rose stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You'd hire me, just like that, just like that. You need work and I need help. Seems like a fair arrangement to me. But you don't know me. I could be a terrible cook. I could be lazy or dishonest or any number of things. Are you any of those things? No. Then we should get along just fine." He stood, pushing the chair back. "Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands for as long as you want it." Rose watched him leave the room, her mind spinning. It was an incredible offer, more than she had any right to expect from a stranger. It was also potentially scandalous, a young, unmarried woman living alone with a bachelor rancher. But what choice did she have? She had no other options, no other prospects, and more than that, she found she wanted to stay. There was something about Austin Yates that drew her, something that made her feel safe and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. She spent the next 3 days recovering in bed, her feet healing slowly but surely. Austin brought her meals 3 times a day and checked her bandages morning and evening, his touch always careful and professional. They talked while he worked, cautious conversations at first that gradually deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had come to Wyoming 5 years ago with nothing but his horse and his saddle, and had built his ranch from scratch through backbreaking work and careful management. He had no family left, his parents having died of cholera when he was 17, and he had been on his own ever since. In turn, she told him about her childhood, about growing up in a small town in Missouri with a mother who had been beautiful and kind but not very practical. Her real father had died when she was 10, leaving them with nothing, and they had struggled for years before her mother caught the eye of Rose's stepfather. Rose had known from the start that the marriage was a mistake, that the man was cold and controlling, but her mother had been desperate and Rose had been too young to do anything about it. "You ever think about going back?" Austin asked on the third evening as he rewrapped her feet. "Confronting your stepbrother trying to claim what should have been yours. There's nothing that should have been mine. The property belonged to my stepfather and he left it to his son. I have no legal claim to anything. That doesn't make it right. No, but it's the reality. And honestly, I don't want to go back. I don't want to see Marcus again, don't want to fight over a life I never wanted anyway. I'd rather start fresh, build something new." Austin tied off the bandage and looked up at her, and she was struck again by how handsome he was, by the strength in his features and the kindness in his eyes. "Then that's what you'll do, and I'll help however I can." On the fourth day, Rose insisted on getting up and moving around. Her feet were still tender, but they were healing well, and she was tired of being confined to bed. Austin helped her to the main room and settled her in one of the armchairs by the fire, bringing her a basket of mending that needed attention. She was grateful for the work, for something to do with her hands and her mind besides worry about the future. She proved to be a decent seamstress, and by the end of the day she had worked through most of the mending pile. Austin praised her work with genuine appreciation, and that night he let her help with dinner, directing her through the steps of making a simple stew while she sat at the table and chopped vegetables. It was domestic and comfortable, and Rose found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, the constant tension she had carried in Marcus's house finally beginning to ease. Over the next 2 weeks, Rose gradually took over the household duties as her feet healed. She discovered she was a better cook than she had given herself credit for, able to turn Austin's limited pantry supplies into satisfying meals. She cleaned and organized, weeded the neglected garden and hung curtains she sewed from fabric Austin brought back from town. The house slowly transformed from a bachelor's utilitarian space into something warmer and more welcoming, and she could see Austin's pleasure in the changes every time he walked through the door. They fell into an easy routine, working together in the evenings after Austin had finished his ranch work for the day. He taught her about the ranch, about the cattle and horses and the rhythms of the seasons. She taught him that food could be more than just fuel, that a house could be a home. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from serious discussions about books and philosophy to silly debates about the best way to make biscuits. Rose found herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking, noticing the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his hands and the gentleness in his touch. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude she felt, just appreciation for his kindness, but she knew she was lying. She was falling for Austin Yates, falling hard and fast and completely. She didn't know if he felt the same way. He was always kind and considerate, but he never crossed any lines, never touched her in any way that could be considered improper. He treated her with respect and courtesy as an employee and a friend, but never anything more. She told herself it was better that way, safer, but her heart disagreed. The ranch hands returned at the end of September. 2 gruff but good-natured men named Tom and Charlie who were surprised but pleased to find a woman's touch evident in the house. They were respectful and polite, tipping their hats when they saw her and praising her cooking enthusiastically. Their presence meant there were witnesses to the propriety of her living arrangement, which eased some of Rose's worry about gossip, though not all of it. In October, Austin made his weekly trip to Lusk for supplies, and asked if Rose wanted to come along. She had been on the ranch for nearly 6 weeks and hadn't left the property once, and she was both eager to see the town and nervous about facing people. But she couldn't hide forever, and she needed to start building a life beyond the ranch, so she agreed. Lusk was a typical Wyoming frontier town, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings and board sidewalks. The town had been founded less than 2 years ago as a water and fueling station along the Wyoming Central Railway, and it still had that raw, unfinished quality that marked so many new settlements. There was a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and various other businesses, all bustling with activity on this bright autumn day. Rose felt eyes on her as they walked down the street, curious gazes from townspeople who probably knew everyone in the area and could spot a newcomer instantly. Austin kept close to her side, his presence protective, and she was grateful for it. They stopped at the general store first, and the proprietor, a friendly middle-aged woman named Mrs. Carlson, greeted Austin warmly and Rose with open curiosity. "This is Miss Rose Preston," Austin said, his tone casual but firm. "She's working as my housekeeper. Rose, this is Mrs. Carlson. She runs the best store in 3 counties." "The only store in 3 counties," Mrs. Carlson said with a laugh, but she looked pleased by the compliment. She studied Rose with sharp but not unkind eyes. "A housekeeper, is it? Well, that's practical. A working ranch needs a good woman's touch. Welcome to Lusk, Miss Preston." "Thank you, Mrs. Carlson. I'm pleased to meet you." They filled their supply list and moved on to other stops around town, and everywhere they went Austin introduced Rose the same way, as his housekeeper. Nothing more and nothing less. Most people accepted this at face value, though Rose caught a few speculative looks and knowing whispers. She held her head high and refused to feel ashamed. She was doing honest work for honest wages, and if people wanted to gossip, that was their problem. On the way back to the ranch, with the wagon loaded with supplies, Austin was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry if that was uncomfortable for you. Small towns can be judgmental." "It wasn't as bad as I feared," Rose admitted. "Most people seemed friendly enough. They are, mostly, but there will be talk. There always is when a young woman lives with a bachelor, even with the hands there for propriety. If it bothers you, if you want to find other arrangements, I'd understand." Rose looked at him, at his profile as he drove the wagon, and felt her heart squeeze. "Do you want me to find other arrangements?" "No." The word came out quick and emphatic. "No, I don't. I like having you there. The house feels like a home now, not just a place to sleep between work, and I enjoy your company, but I don't want to ruin your reputation or make your life harder." "My reputation was pretty well ruined the moment my stepbrother abandoned me in the woods," Rose said dryly. "I think working as a housekeeper is probably the least scandalous thing I could be doing, and I like being there too. I like the ranch and the work and—" She hesitated, then made herself finish. "And I enjoy your company as well." He glanced at her, something warm and hopeful in his eyes, and reached over to squeeze her hand briefly before returning his attention to the road. The touch was brief, but it sent warmth flooding through her, and she found herself smiling for the rest of the ride home. The autumn wore on, the days growing shorter and colder as October gave way to November. Rose had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and it felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since her childhood. She had her own room now, Austin having insisted on giving her the bedroom permanently, while he took over a small room off the kitchen that had been used for storage. She had her own space and privacy, but she found herself spending most of her free time in the main room with Austin, reading or sewing while he did paperwork or worked on tack repair. They had grown comfortable with each other in a way that felt both natural and precious. They could sit in companionable silence or talk for hours, and Rose found herself sharing thoughts and feelings with him that she had never shared with anyone. He listened without judgment, offered advice when asked and silence when that was what she needed. She felt seen by him in a way she had never experienced before, valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. She also couldn't ignore the growing attraction between them, the way her breath caught when he walked into a room, the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. There were moments when the air between them seemed to crackle with possibility, when they stood just a little too close or their hands brushed, and neither pulled away. But Austin never pushed, never made any move that could be construed as taking advantage of her position in his household, and Rose was too uncertain of herself to make the first move. The first snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that transformed the ranch into something magical and beautiful. Rose stood on the porch in the early morning, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sun rise over the white landscape and feeling a contentment she had never expected to find. She heard the door open behind her and turned to find Austin joining her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, handing her one of the cups. "It's perfect." She sipped the hot coffee, grateful for its warmth. "I never thought I could be happy in a place like this, so far from anything, but I am. I'm happier here than I've been anywhere. I'm glad." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Rose, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about leaving? About going somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunities?" The question made her heart drop. "Do you want me to leave?" "God, no." He set his coffee cup on the porch rail and turned to face her fully. "That's not what I'm asking at all. I'm asking because I need to know if you're planning to stay. Because if you are, there's something I need to say, something I've been holding back because I didn't want to complicate things or make you feel pressured." Rose set her own cup down, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm not planning to leave. I want to stay here for as long as you'll have me. Then, I need you to know that what we have, it's more than just employer and employee for me. It has been almost from the start. I care about you, Rose. More than I should, probably, more than is wise, but I can't help it. You've become important to me, essential even, and I don't want to pretend anymore that you're just my housekeeper." Her breath caught in her throat, hope and fear warring in her chest. "What are you saying, Austin?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've already fallen, I don't know. All I know is that when I wake up, you're my first thought, and when I go to bed, you're my last. I think about you all day while I'm working, look forward to coming home because I know you'll be here. You've made this house a home, but more than that, you've made my life something worth living." He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "I know this might not be what you want to hear. I know you might not feel the same way, and if that's the case, I swear nothing has to change. You can keep working here, keep living here, and I'll never mention this again. But I had to tell you. I couldn't keep it inside anymore." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy, not sorrow. "You foolish man," she said, her voice breaking. "Of course I feel the same way. I've been falling for you since the day you found me in those woods, since you took care of me and gave me a place to belong. I love you, Austin. I love you so much it terrifies me." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out, brilliant and warm and completely transforming. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. "Can I kiss you, please?" He kissed her softly at first, almost tentatively, as if he couldn't quite believe this was real. But when she responded, rising up on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming something passionate and claiming. Rose had been kissed before, awkward fumbling kisses from boys she barely remembered, but this was different. This was a kiss that spoke of longing and promise, of a future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, the way you deserve. And then, if you'll have me, I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife, not just my housekeeper." "Yes," Rose said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it, though I think we've been courting already in our own way. Maybe so, but I still want to do it properly. Take you to church socials, bring you flowers, all of it. I'd like that." She kissed him again, quick and sweet. "But Austin, I don't care about any of that as much as I care about being with you. You saved my life, gave me a home and a purpose and a reason to hope again. I would marry you tomorrow if that's what you wanted." "Don't tempt me," he said with a laugh, "because I would take you up on that in a heartbeat. But people in Lusk already gossip about us. Let's give them a proper courtship to talk about instead, show them that this is real and respectable." So they courted, though it was a strange sort of courtship given that they lived in the same house and saw each other every day. But Austin made an effort to treat her like a lady being wooed, bringing her wildflowers he found on the range, taking her for rides around the ranch to show her places he loved, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings and talking about their dreams for the future. He kissed her often, but always stopped before things went too far, insisting they would wait for their wedding night. They attended church services in Lusk on Sundays, sitting together in the back pew and enduring the stares and whispers with dignity. Austin made it clear to anyone who asked that he was courting Rose with the intention of marriage, and gradually the gossip shifted from scandalous to romantic. The story of how he had found her abandoned in the woods and rescued her became common knowledge, and public opinion turned firmly against Marcus Preston, wherever he might be. In December, Austin drove Rose into Cheyenne, a 2-day journey so she could buy fabric for a wedding dress and other necessities. They stayed in separate rooms at a respectable hotel, though Austin spent every possible moment with her, showing her the city and treating her to dinners at nice restaurants and a performance at the theater. It was magical and romantic, and Rose fell even more deeply in love with this man who treated her like she was precious and valuable. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside and a fire crackled in the hearth, Austin got down on one knee and presented Rose with a simple gold band he had purchased in Cheyenne. "I know we've already agreed to marry," he said, "but I wanted to ask you properly. Rose Preston, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him. 1,000 times yes. They were married on a cold but sunny day in early January of 1874 in the small church in Lusk with most of the town in attendance. Rose wore the dress she had sewn herself from the fabric Austin had bought her, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. She carried wildflowers preserved from the previous summer, and Austin wore his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with complete sincerity and witnessed by a community that had come to embrace their story. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Austin kissed her, cheers erupted from the congregation, and Rose felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. They held a simple reception at the ranch, with Tom and Charlie and several neighboring ranch families in attendance. Mrs. Carlson had baked a cake, and there was food and music and dancing. Rose had never been happier, swirling in Austin's arms as someone played a fiddle, surrounded by people who had welcomed her and accepted her as one of their own. When the guests finally left and they were alone, Austin carried Rose over the threshold of their bedroom, setting her down gently beside the bed. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm just happy. I love you, Austin." "I love you too. More than I can ever put into words." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Rose let herself sink into him, giving herself over to the man she loved and trusted. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped for, tender and passionate and perfect, and when she finally fell asleep in Austin's arms, she felt completely and utterly at peace. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Rose threw herself into making the ranch house even more of a home, sewing curtains and quilts, cooking elaborate meals, planning a garden for the spring. Austin worked hard during the day but always made time for her in the evenings, and they grew even closer as husband and wife than they had been as friends. In March, Rose realized she was pregnant. She told Austin over dinner one night, watching nervously for his reaction. His face lit up with such pure joy that her nervousness vanished instantly, and he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing. "We're going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A real family." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see he was. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." "I never thought I'd have this, Rose. A wife I love, a home, a child on the way. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Rose bloomed with it, her happiness evident in every aspect of her life. Austin was attentive and protective, sometimes comically so, fussing over her and trying to keep her from doing any heavy work. She let him pamper her, knowing it came from love, even as she continued to maintain the household and care for the garden that was thriving in the spring sunshine. In early November, almost exactly a year after Austin had told her he loved her, Rose went into labor. Austin sent Tom racing to town for the doctor and Mrs. Carlson, who had experience as a midwife, and he stayed by Rose's side through the long hours of labor, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Their son was born just after dawn, a healthy baby with a strong cry and a shock of dark hair. Austin cut the cord with shaking hands and then held the baby with an expression of such awe and tenderness that Rose fell in love with him all over again. "He's perfect," Austin whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son cradled in his father's arms, Rose knew exactly what felt right. "James," she said. "James Austin Yates." "James," Austin repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, James." Life with a newborn was exhausting and chaotic and absolutely wonderful. Austin was a devoted father, getting up with the baby at night so Rose could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and marveling at him. Rose recovered quickly from the birth and found she loved motherhood, loved the weight of her baby in her arms and the feeling of nursing him and watching him grow. The years that followed were full and rich. Rose and Austin's love deepened with time, weathering the inevitable challenges of marriage and parenthood and ranching life. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah born in 1876, and another son named Thomas born in 1878. The house that had once been a lonely bachelor's dwelling became a real home, filled with the noise and mess and joy of a young family. The ranch prospered as well. Austin was a skilled rancher, and with Rose managing the household and finances, they were able to expand their operation, buying more land and increasing their herd. Tom and Charlie remained loyal employees, eventually building their own houses on the property and becoming like family. The ranch became known throughout the region as one of the best-run and most successful operations, and Austin's reputation as an honest and fair man grew. Rose never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to dying in those woods. She made it a point to help others when she could, taking in a young widow who needed work, donating food and supplies to families struggling through hard times, and speaking up for those who had no voice. She and Austin became pillars of the Lusk community, respected and valued for their integrity and generosity. She never heard from Marcus again. Part of her had feared he might show up someday, might try to cause trouble or make some claim on her, but he never did. She assumed he had taken the money from selling his father's property and moved on to wherever men like him ended up. She didn't waste time thinking about him or wishing for revenge. She had built a life so much better than anything he could have imagined for her, and that was revenge enough. On a warm evening in June of 1885, Rose and Austin sat on their porch watching the sunset, the sounds of their children playing in the yard drifting to them on the breeze. James was nearly 11, Sarah was 9, and Thomas was 7, all of them healthy and happy and loved. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, the result of years of hard work and careful stewardship. "You ever think about that day?" Austin asked, reaching over to take Rose's hand. "The day I found you in the woods." "Sometimes," Rose admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago now, like it happened to someone else." "It was the best day of my life," Austin said. "Finding you, I mean. I didn't know it at the time, but it was. You changed everything for me, Rose. You made me believe in things I'd given up on, made me hope for things I never thought I'd have." "You saved my life," Rose said, squeezing his hand. "In every way that matters. I was lost in more ways than just being in those woods, and you found me and brought me home. We saved each other, I think." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Rose. I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond. I love you too, always and forever." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, surrounded by the life they had built together. Rose thought about the terrified girl who had been left to die in the wilderness, alone and hopeless, and marveled at how far she had come. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who was strong and confident and deeply, completely happy. Her stepbrother had tried to destroy her, but he had failed. Instead, he had inadvertently given her the greatest gift imaginable, because if he hadn't abandoned her in those woods, she never would have been found by Austin Yates. She never would have found her home, her purpose, her love. She had been lost, and she had been found, and in being found she had discovered everything she never knew she needed. And for that, she would be grateful for the rest of her days. The children's laughter rang out across the ranch as Sarah chased her brothers through the yard, and Austin called out to them to be careful near the fence. Rose smiled, watching her family, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was her life now, her beautiful, messy, perfect life, and she wouldn't change a single moment of it. The sun set completely, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the Yates family went inside together, into the warm glow of the house that love had built. And there, in that home on the Wyoming frontier, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Rose Preston Yates finally and completely found her happily ever after.